How was America really born? Was it created in a single moment, on a single day, when a group of brave men signed a famous document? Or was it born slowly, through years of struggle, fear, hope, and impossible decisions? Many people believe that America began on July 4, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. But the real story is deeper, more complicated, and far more human. It is a story of ordinary people facing extraordinary problems. It is a story of loyalty and rebellion, courage and doubt. It is the story of how 13 small colonies decided to challenge the most powerful empire in the world. To understand how America was really born, we must go back more than 250 years. In the 1700s, the eastern coast of North America was controlled by Great Britain. There were 13 colonies, stretching from Massachusetts in the north to Georgia in the south. The people living there were mostly British settlers. They spoke English. They followed British laws. They considered themselves loyal subjects of the British king. At first, life in the colonies was not so bad. The land was rich and full of opportunity. Farmers grew crops. Merchants traded goods. Cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia became busy centers of business. Many colonists felt proud to be part of the British Empire. But everything changed after a long and expensive war. In 1754, Britain fought a war against France in North America. This conflict is known as the French and Indian War. After many years of fighting, Britain won. France lost most of its land in North America. On the surface, it looked like a great victory for the British Empire. However, victory came at a high price. The war had cost Britain a huge amount of money. The British government was now deeply in debt. And someone had to pay that debt. The British leaders believed the American colonies should help. After all, the war had been fought partly to protect them. So Britain began to introduce new taxes in the colonies. This was the beginning of a serious conflict. In 1765, Britain passed the Stamp Act. This law required colonists to pay a tax on printed materials, such as newspapers, legal documents, and even playing cards. For the first time, the British government was directly taxing the colonies to raise money. The colonists were shocked and angry. They asked an important question: why should we pay taxes if we have no representatives in the British Parliament? This idea became famous as no taxation without representation. The colonists believed that only their own local governments had the right to tax them. They felt that Parliament, located thousands of miles away in London, did not understand their lives and had no right to take their money. At first, the protests were peaceful. Colonists organized meetings. They wrote letters. They gave speeches. They asked the king to reconsider. But tension continued to grow. Britain did not back down. Instead, it introduced more taxes, including taxes on tea, glass, and paper. British soldiers were sent to the colonies to maintain order. To many colonists, this felt less like protection and more like control. The presence of soldiers created fear and anger. Small arguments sometimes turned into violence. In 1770, a tragic event took place in Boston. A group of colonists began arguing with British soldiers. The situation quickly became chaotic. Shots were fired. 5 colonists were killed. This event became known as the Boston Massacre. News of the incident spread quickly. Colonial leaders used it to show that Britain was becoming a dangerous and oppressive power. Many colonists who had once felt loyal to Britain began to question that loyalty. Still, independence was not yet the main goal. Most colonists did not want complete separation. They simply wanted fair treatment. They still hoped the king would listen to them and solve the problem peacefully. But in 1773, another dramatic event pushed the colonies closer to revolution. The British government gave a special advantage to the British East India Company, allowing it to sell tea directly to the colonies at a lower price. While the tea was cheaper, it still included a tax. Many colonists saw this as a trick. They believed Britain was trying to make them accept the idea of taxation without representation. In December 1773, a group of colonists in Boston decided to act. Disguised as Native Americans, they boarded British ships in the harbor and threw hundreds of boxes of tea into the water. This bold protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government was furious. It responded with harsh punishments. It closed the port of Boston and limited the power of local governments. These laws were called the Intolerable Acts by the colonists. Instead of frightening the colonies into silence, these punishments had the opposite effect. For the first time, the colonies began to unite. In 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia. This meeting was called the First Continental Congress. The delegates discussed their problems and decided to protest together. They agreed to boycott British goods. This was a turning point. The colonies were no longer acting alone. They were beginning to see themselves as one people with a shared cause. However, even at this moment, many still hoped for peace. They did not yet fully imagine creating a new nation. They were walking a dangerous line between loyalty and rebellion. Then, in April 1775, everything changed. British soldiers were sent to seize weapons stored by colonial militias in Massachusetts. When they reached the towns of Lexington and Concord, they were met by armed colonists. No one knows who fired the first shot. But once the shooting began, there was no turning back. The American Revolutionary War had started. What began as protests over taxes had now become open war against the most powerful empire in the world. At that moment, the idea of independence was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a necessity. But how did a group of divided colonies transform into a united nation? Who convinced them that full independence was the only solution? And how did they find the courage to risk everything? The real birth of America was still ahead. When the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the conflict between Britain and the colonies changed forever. What had started as political disagreement was now a war. But even then, independence was not yet officially declared. Many colonists were still unsure. Some believed rebellion was too dangerous. Britain had the strongest army and the most powerful navy in the world. How could farmers, workers, and shopkeepers defeat professional soldiers? Others still felt emotional loyalty to King George III. They did not hate Britain. They only wanted fairness. At the same time, there were colonists who strongly supported the king. These people were called loyalists. They believed rebellion was wrong and even sinful. They feared that independence would bring chaos, violence, and economic collapse. So the colonies were divided. Families were divided. Neighbors did not trust each other. The question was no longer only about taxes. It was about identity. Were they British subjects? Or were they something new? In May 1775, representatives from all 13 colonies met again in Philadelphia. This meeting became known as the Second Continental Congress. Unlike the first meeting, this one had a much more serious responsibility. War had already begun. Decisions could not wait. One of their first actions was to create a continental army. But an army needs a leader. The Congress chose George Washington, a tall and calm man from Virginia. Washington had experience as a military officer. But more importantly, he represented unity. By choosing a leader from the southern colonies, the Congress showed that this struggle was not only about Massachusetts or Boston. It belonged to all the colonies. Still, even as fighting continued, many leaders hoped for reconciliation. In July 1775, Congress sent a final request to the king. This letter was called the Olive Branch Petition. It asked for peace and mutual understanding. But the king refused. Instead, he declared that the colonies were in open rebellion. More British troops were sent to America. The message was clear: there would be no compromise. At this critical moment, a powerful voice entered the debate. In January 1776, a man named Thomas Paine published a small pamphlet called Common Sense. It was written in simple, direct language. Unlike many political writings of that time, it was easy for ordinary people to understand. Paine made a bold argument. He said it was not only practical for the colonies to become independent, it was natural and necessary. Why should a large continent be ruled by a small island? Why should people accept a king simply because of birth? His words spread quickly. Thousands of copies were printed and shared. People read it in homes, in taverns, and in public squares. Common sense changed the conversation. Independence was no longer a radical idea. It was becoming a logical solution. By the summer of 1776, the mood had shifted. In June, a committee was formed to draft a formal Declaration of Independence. The main writer was a young lawyer from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson. He was only 33 years old. Jefferson believed deeply in the ideas of liberty and equality. In the document he wrote, he explained that all men are created equal and that they are born with certain natural rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were revolutionary words. The Declaration did more than announce separation from Britain. It explained the philosophy behind it. It argued that governments exist to protect the rights of the people. And if a government fails to do that, the people have the right to change or remove it. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. This date is often celebrated as the birth of America. But in reality, signing the document did not create a new nation overnight. It created a promise. And that promise had to be defended. The war was far from over. In fact, the next few years were extremely difficult. The Continental Army was smaller, less trained, and poorly supplied. Soldiers often lacked food, proper clothing, and even shoes. Winters were harsh. Many soldiers became sick. Some gave up and went home. Meanwhile, the British Army was powerful and experienced. They captured major cities, including New York and Philadelphia. At times, it seemed the revolution might fail. Yet something unusual held the Americans together. It was not money. It was not military strength. It was belief. They believed they were fighting for something larger than themselves. They believed they were building a new kind of society, one based not on kings and inherited power, but on representation and rights. George Washington played a crucial role during these dark times. He was not a perfect general, but he understood patience and resilience. Instead of trying to win every battle, he focused on keeping the army alive. As long as the army survived, the revolution survived. One of the most difficult moments came during the winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge. The army camped in freezing conditions. Food was scarce. Many men suffered from disease. It would have been easy to surrender. But they did not. With the help of foreign allies, especially France, the American forces slowly became stronger. France provided money, weapons, and ships. The conflict was no longer only a colonial rebellion. It was becoming an international war. Then, in 1781, a decisive event changed everything. British General Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia. American and French forces surrounded him by land and sea. There was no escape. After weeks of pressure, Cornwallis surrendered. Although small battles continued, Yorktown effectively ended the war. 2 years later, in 1783, Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States in the Treaty of Paris. The colonies had won. But victory brought a new challenge. Winning independence was one thing. Creating a stable nation was another. How do you unite 13 different states with different economies and interests? How do you balance freedom with order? How do you turn revolutionary ideas into working government? The war had given birth to a country in spirit. Now it needed structure, law, and unity. The real test of America's birth was just beginning. After the war ended in 1783, the United States was finally free. But freedom did not automatically create stability. The 13 former colonies were now independent states. Each had its own government, its own laws, and its own interests. At first, they were connected under a simple agreement called the Articles of Confederation. This document created a weak central government. It allowed the states to remain powerful and independent. At first, this seemed like a safe choice. After all, the revolution had been fought against a strong and distant authority. The people were afraid of creating another system that looked like a monarchy. But soon, serious problems appeared. The national government had no power to collect taxes. It had no strong army. It could not easily control trade between the states. The country was free, but it was disorganized and financially unstable. Some states argued with each other. Economic difficulties created anger among farmers and workers. One rebellion, known as Shays' Rebellion in 1786, shocked the nation. Angry farmers in Massachusetts protested against debt and high taxes. The government struggled to respond. This event made many leaders realize that the young country was fragile. Independence had been won through unity. Now survival required structure. In 1787, delegates from the states met again in Philadelphia. Their goal was to improve the existing system. But soon they understood that small changes would not be enough. They decided to create an entirely new framework of government. This meeting became known as the Constitutional Convention. After months of debate, compromise, and intense discussion, they produced the United States Constitution. This document created a stronger federal government, divided into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each branch had different powers. Each branch could limit the others. This system was designed to prevent tyranny while maintaining order. In 1788, the Constitution was approved. In 1789, George Washington became the first President of the United States. Only then did the new nation truly begin to function. So how was America really born? It was not born in a single battle. It was not born only on July 4, 1776. It was born through years of argument, sacrifice, fear, hope, and determination. It was born when ordinary people demanded representation. It was shaped in war. And it was secured through careful compromise and bold political imagination. The birth of America was not a perfect event. The new nation still struggled with inequality, slavery, and division. Those problems would continue for generations. But the foundation had been laid. A group of colonies had transformed themselves into a republic. And from uncertainty and rebellion, a new country entered the world.